If at any point you have struggled with sobriety, whether that be alcohol, drugs, TV, sex, any kind of addiction, in this video I'm going to tell you exactly how I've stayed sober from my addictions for over 2 years. Now, I do believe that there's many different ways to approach sobriety, but at its core, I think the message in this video is really the only way that sobriety is going to work long term. So what's so special, what's so different about me or this video from all the other videos about sobriety? Until about 2 years ago, I was addicted to movies and TV, marijuana, promiscuous sex. What I was truly addicted to was control. I cheated in all 3 of my first monogamous relationships. I lied to family members, I lied to friends, I lied to myself. It wasn't until December of 2019 that I finally stopped. Though I did at one point attend recovery meetings, I am not in recovery currently. I'm not going to 12-step meetings. The traditional path of recovery is not the one that I took. And I firmly believe that that's one of the reasons that I've not just been able to stay sober, but lost my desire to engage in these behaviors. So why was I addicted? Obviously, there's a number of reasons. There's the neglect I experienced in childhood and the solutions that I found to that neglect as a kid, heartbreak, and there's all this pain that I experienced growing up that I didn't know how to deal with. And because I experienced all this pain and I didn't know how to deal with it and I didn't really have a community of support, I started to develop low self-esteem and this belief that I deserve pain and I deserve that kind of treatment, that kind of life, that misery. So to answer, why was I addicted? It truly all boils down to I wanted to hurt myself. And even though I knew that there was other paths, I wasn't succeeding at getting on those paths. So I didn't like where I was at in my life and I wanted to escape. Now, the important distinction that I want to make here, which is one of the most important points of this video, is that it wasn't that things happened to me and that because of those things happening to me, I became addicted. I chose my addictions because at the time in my life when I chose them, they were actually solutions. Which gets to what the core message of this video is gonna be, and that is that my addiction is not a problem. It's not something that I need to eliminate from my life and avoid like the plague and this enemy. My addiction saved my life at one point in time. Obviously, it no longer serves me because the problems I'm facing today, I have better tools for, and I'm not a small child that's at the mercy of his parents. So the problems that I'm facing today are not the same ones, and I'm not the same person. And so addiction it really boils down to making a different choice. And now that's easy to say, right? It's not easy to do, obviously, otherwise I wouldn't be making this video. And I believe that the way to make it easy is through trial and error. Once I let go of this mentality that I had to be perfect at recovering and letting go of my addictions, it became way easier, right? Because relapse isn't this thing I have to be terrified of doing and then ashamed of if I do. And, it becomes almost like a learning lesson and it becomes another tool. But right, so where did I start? Because it's not as straightforward as you might think to just, you have all these addictive behaviors and now you're just gonna decide one day to stop doing them. Maybe that might work for some people, but it's not gonna work for everyone and it might not last for the people that it does work for. What's important to understand about deciding to let go of addiction or replacing it with a healthier behavior, for me, was that before I could get sober, before I could even think about getting sober, like actually realistically and honestly think about what is that gonna look like, I had to suffer. And I had to suffer enough to want to make a change. Now, why is that? Because change is unpredictable. I don't know what change is gonna look like, and change is something that I'm afraid of because, again, my addiction is to control. And so I had to suffer enough that my suffering scared me more than whatever was on the other side of sobriety and change. and lack of control. Now there's not, obviously there's no blueprints I can give you for like, all right, so here's how you suffer enough, right? That's the part that's up to you to figure out. And that's the part that really, I think if you're watching this video, there's a voice in your head that thinks and is kind of fed up with your suffering. Again, my experience was just, I had to ignore that voice enough times that I was just like, hey man, I'm sick of my own shit. I'm not gonna ignore that voice anymore. From there, I found people who were living the kind of life that I wanted to live, and who were the kind of person, the kind of man in my case, that I want to be. Once I found them, I decided I'm gonna try all of the things that they're doing. Again, trial and error, lots of it. Getting comfortable with starting over again and again and again. A few of the tangible places where I started were the Mating Grounds podcast. This was a podcast that came out around 2014-15. Man, even to this day, it is one of the best resources, not just for sobriety, but for building the life that I want. So there's the podcast, and then there's 3 book recommendations. One of them is A Dose of Hope by Dr. Dan Engel. There's How to Do the Work by Nicole LePera. And then there's One Last Talk by Philip McKernan. And again, I'm not going to get into the specifics of why I'm recommending these books, but they all helped me develop a map of my inner world and then lay out a path to walk that inner world and to start rewiring some of the stuff that, in childhood or young adulthood maybe got a little bit twisted. So that's where I started, right? But once the ship has sailed and I'm aboard, I've got to learn how to navigate, and I've got to learn how to stay afloat. So how have I stayed sober? The only way I've been able to stay sober and not want to not be sober is by making my sober state of mind more desirable than an altered state of consciousness. And the only way to do that is by healing whatever led me astray in the first place. Whatever trauma, whatever wounds, whatever pain prevents me from feeling peace, and then learning to meet the needs that those altered states of consciousness met, but in a healthier way. Right? And so again, whatever drives you to engage in these behaviors, it's meeting a need that I had not learned how to meet in a healthy way, right? And so like a very quick and simple example is one of the reasons that I smoked marijuana was because I wanted to escape and from my structure and my, just the grind. And I wanted to have this sense of adventure and just like, fuck my responsibilities. So one of the ways that I've learned to meet that need in a healthier way is by going for really long walks without a way to tell time and just kind of getting lost in nature or in wherever I am. Because as a kid, I did that a lot. I would just go on walks or walk around my house or just be outside and play soccer by myself. And I wasn't thinking, it's almost 7, I gotta make sure that I read before bed. Or when I was a kid, I just was out there, just being. And so going on these walks is a way that I can reconnect to that and meet that need for adventure. And I used to prefer to do everything high rather than sober because being sober was uncomfortable. And so again, it's not about learning how to not be high. It's about learning how to be sober and how to be comfortable being sober. So one of the lessons I learned about this was that consistently choosing to live in an altered state of consciousness and an altered reality, yes, it's a problem for me, but it's also an indicator that I'm avoiding something. And so even though, again, this is a behavior I want to replace, when this behavior shows up, it's not my enemy. It's my partner because it's trying to tell me something that I'm not listening to, that I'm ignoring, that I'm avoiding. Getting high, watching movies, getting drunk, having sex at times was literally a way for me to avoid, to escape. It was a mechanism that I put in place. And so once I learned how to deal with the things I was avoiding, that mechanism lost its purpose. Now, if you notice, I'm not really saying start doing this instead. I'm not giving you specific actions or behaviors because those are gonna look different for everyone. depending on what kind of life you lead. And the reason for why I'm not giving you specific things is because what I'm getting at here is the core. And if I understand what's at the core of my behaviors and I fix that, what I have found is that the new behaviors, sometimes they just naturally come out, and it's a process of discovery. Again, that's one of the beauties of this perceived lack of control, is that there's also new spontaneity, right? I didn't used to go for 1.5 or 2 hour long walks every single day. Fuck, I didn't even want to leave my room to eat breakfast because I was so addicted to writing and creating and doing. So it's not like when I was deciding, hey, I want to be sober, I don't like getting high all the time or, overworking myself. It's not like I thought, well, one of the ways I can do that is by walking every day. That just happened to be a byproduct of me going a little bit deeper and dealing with the why. Why am I overworking myself? Why am I choosing to escape? And so lastly, what does my life look like today? Most importantly is that I actually prefer to be sober than I do being high or altered states of consciousness or, overworking myself. And the main reason for that is that I have managed to find a level of peace in my mind and in my body. Now, that doesn't mean that I am some enlightened being and that I don't have days where I do overwork myself or I do watch movies and TV or, whatever it is. But on that note, I feel so much more comfortable being sober and so much more confident now in myself that even when I engage in what used to be my addictive behaviors, that doesn't make me want to return to the behavior permanently. And so in a way, I've lost my fear of relapsing, right? This is not about avoiding, because that is precisely why we were engaging in the addictive behaviors. So if I just am learning now, I have to avoid smoking weed, I'm just gonna fucking learn how to do something else that's just as bad as that. Because again, I'm still avoiding. The goal here is to confront and to not let things simmer for so long that I don't even know they're there. And not to attach to this label of relapse. If you're trying to quit drinking coffee, as you're doing that, whatever drinking that coffee was helping you to suppress, it's gonna come up. And you still don't know how to deal with that. So it's natural that as these things come up that we've been ignoring, we're gonna fall back on our old coping mechanisms because we're still learning new ones. So the needs I had, right? Spontaneity, adventure. I meet those by what I've just mentioned, going on long walks in nature. I meet my need for attention, which expressed itself previously through promiscuous sex, by joining communities and meeting new people that I can develop relationships and friendships with. I journal about my day, my feelings, my life, my future regularly so that I can consistently stay in touch with my mental, emotional, and physical state of being. And I don't just focus on producing, right? Because that's one of the things that led me to smoking weed. Weed was my way of saying, hey man, I'm producing too much. I need a little break. I don't have to smoke weed to give myself that break. So now, maybe even though I have all these things that I want to get finished, sometimes I'm like, you know what? This week, I'm gonna paint. I'm going to do what I feel called to do in that moment, in that week, not the thing that I have forced myself to believe I have to do. So I hope that this video touches you or helps you in some way. My goal with this was just to create something that I felt I was lacking when I wanted to stay sober. So hopefully this gives you an idea of where to start and what you can expect along the way. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, consider subscribing. Most of my videos are about these kinds of topics, and have a wonderful week.